Elliot Marston had never been the type to form quick attachments, but the quiet days that followed made Darren Hale's presence feel strangely necessary, like a subtle tether keeping him from drifting too far from himself. He didn't seek Darren out deliberately, at least that's what he told himself, but somehow their paths crossed with a frequency that felt both natural and inevitable. Darren's calmness had a gravitational pull, and Elliot found himself leaning toward it without consciously deciding to at home. Things with Caleb Rossner were unraveling at a pace that was impossible to ignore. Conversations had shrunk to functional exchanges, the once familiar rhythm replaced by a cold, distant syncopation. Caleb was present only in the physical sense, his body in the room, his mind clearly elsewhere. Every time his phone lit up, Elliot saw a glimmer of something in Caleb's expression, something that wasn't meant for him. It wasn't guilt, and it wasn't joy. It was a quiet anticipation that stung more deeply than anything dramatic ever could. One morning, as Elliot prepared coffee in silence, Caleb emerged from the bedroom already dressed for the day. He moved with a brisk efficiency that felt performative, as though he needed to establish the idea of urgency without actually explaining it. Heading out early, Caleb said, sliding his watch onto his wrist without looking up. Elliot nodded, trying to keep his voice even. Anything special happening at work? Not really. Just things to get done. The answer landed flatly, and Caleb kissed the air near Elliot's cheek before pulling away. It was the kind of gesture that looked affectionate from afar but felt hollow up close. When the door closed, Elliot stood alone in the apartment, listening to the faint echo of what their mornings used to be. At the office, the energy was different. The small hum of printers and distant conversations created a kind of anonymous comfort, white noise that allowed Elliot to exist without being scrutinized. Darren arrived with a stack of project briefs and a casual, "Good morning," his tone steady, unforced. There was something grounding in the way he carried himself, as though he took care not to disturb the emotional balance of the people around him. During lunch, Darren suggested they step outside, saying the air inside felt stale enough to pickle anyone's thoughts. Elliot agreed, grateful for any excuse not to sit alone with his restless mind. They found a bench beneath a row of leafless trees, the winter sun casting pale beams across the pavement. "You've been quieter than usual," Darren said gently. "Did something happen?" Elliot hesitated. He had guarded his personal life carefully, unwilling to expose the fractures he feared would widen if spoken aloud. But Darren wasn't asking out of curiosity, he was asking out of genuine concern, and the difference made Elliot's defenses soften. "It's just been a strange few weeks," Elliot said. "At home." Darren waited, not pressing, not probing. The silence he offered wasn't demanding, it was patient, structured, and safe. Elliot continued carefully, choosing each word like he was stepping across thin ice. "Caleb and I haven't been in sync lately. He's distant, distracted. I feel like I'm trying to talk to someone who's already half gone." Darren's expression didn't shift with surprise or judgment. Instead, he studied Elliot with a soft, steady empathy. "That sounds exhausting," he said. "Caring for someone who won't meet you halfway can wear down even the strongest parts of you." The truth of it hit Elliot harder than expected. He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. He hated the way his throat tightened when he thought about Caleb's clipped answers, his cold tone, the feeling of being treated like an obligation rather than a partner. On their way back, Darren walked beside him with an unspoken understanding that Elliot didn't have to perform anything, not happiness, not composure, not certainty. Days continued like this. Caleb grew more detached, Elliot grew more conflicted, and Darren's presence became a steady constant in the storm. He didn't invade Elliot's space, but he filled the quiet parts of his day with simple moments of connection, asking thoughtful questions, noticing when Elliot seemed overwhelmed, offering solutions without solving his life for him. One late evening, after most of the office lights had dimmed, Elliot lingered at his desk trying to finish a design revision. His eyes felt strained, his thoughts scattered. Darren stopped by, leaning lightly against the partition. "You're still here," he said. "That's not like you." "I needed to keep busy," Elliot admitted. Darren nodded slowly. "Sometimes distraction helps. Sometimes it just delays what needs facing." Elliot looked up, meeting Darren's steady gaze. "And what do you think I'm delaying?" Your own comfort, Darren replied. You're protecting everyone except yourself. The words settled into Elliot with an uncomfortable clarity. He had been holding his breath without realizing it, waiting, hoping, bracing, for Caleb to return to him, emotionally if not physically. But the gap between them only widened. Outside, rain began to fall in thin, shimmering sheets. When Elliot stepped toward the exit, he paused under the awning, watching the downpour blur the city lights into soft halos. Darren approached quietly, stopping beside him. Do you need a ride? He asked. It's getting worse. Elliot could have refused, but he didn't want to. Not because of convenience, but because being beside Darren felt like standing somewhere stable after weeks of uneven ground. During the drive, the air between them was warm but measured. The radio played something soft and formless, just enough sound to make the silence comfortable. Elliot rested his forehead lightly against the window, watching droplets slide in crooked lines. You don't deserve to feel alone in your own home, Darren said, almost to himself. The remark wasn't an invitation. It wasn't a declaration. It was an observation, simple, truthful, and painfully accurate. Elliot didn't respond. He didn't trust his voice. But the words echoed through him long after he stepped out of Darren's car. That night, when he entered the apartment, the lights were off. Caleb's shoes were gone. His jacket was missing. A short text on Elliot's phone read, "Working late." "Don't wait up." Elliot stared at the screen, the weight of its simplicity pressing down on him. It was in that quiet, dimly lit moment that he recognized a truth he could no longer avoid. Something was breaking, not being tested, not being strained, but breaking, and the break was no longer subtle. Elliot Marston woke the next morning with a heaviness he couldn't fully name. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that swallowed sound instead of holding it. Caleb Rossner hadn't returned until long after Elliot fell asleep. He could tell by the coat draped carelessly on the chair and the faint smell of cologne lingering in the entryway. It wasn't the scent that bothered him, it was the unfamiliarity of it. Caleb hadn't worn that cologne in years. Elliot moved through the morning slowly, each action deliberate, boiling water, stirring oatmeal, opening blinds that let in a dim ribbon of gray light. He kept hoping Caleb would emerge from the bedroom with an explanation that made sense. But when Caleb finally appeared, his expression was already distant, his eyes shadowed with secrecy. "Did you sleep okay?" Elliot asked, hating how hopeful the question sounded. Caleb shrugged. "Barely. Work was a mess." It was the usual answer, delivered with the same tone that left no room for conversation. He grabbed his keys with mechanical efficiency and hesitated for a moment, as though remembering he should say something more. "I'll be home late." Again. Elliot nodded, though inside he felt a sharp tug of dread. "Right. Be safe." The door clicked shut, and the lock slid into place with a cold finality. For several minutes, Elliot simply stood there, staring at the empty space where Caleb had been. Something inside him had reached a threshold, not anger, not desperation, but a quiet certainty that pretending nothing was wrong was no longer possible. At work, he forced himself to remain composed. He immersed himself in projects, adjusting colors, refining layouts, reviewing proposals with mechanical focus. But even in the noise of productivity, his thoughts drifted toward Caleb's evasive behavior, the late nights, the unreadable expression behind that thin, practiced smile. He didn't notice Darren Hale approaching until the chair beside him shifted. Darren set a cup of tea on Elliot's desk without a word. Elliot blinked. "What's this for?" "You looked like someone wrestling an invisible storm," Darren said. "Tea doesn't fix much, but it steadies the hands." A small, reluctant laugh escaped Elliot. "Is it that obvious?" "Only if someone's paying attention," Darren replied, giving him a quiet, knowing look. There was no pity in Darren's gaze, only recognition. It made Elliot's chest tighten in ways he couldn't easily explain. For a moment he let the warmth of the tea seep into his palms, grounding him. Later in the afternoon, while the office buzzed with low conversation and the hum of machines, Elliot received a message from Caleb. "We need to talk tonight." 7 words, delivered without context, without warmth. A message that could mean everything or nothing. Elliot stared at the screen, feeling his pulse accelerate. He reread it, searching for tone, for subtext, for a hint of reassurance. There was nothing. Just the blank finality of a conversation he'd feared for weeks. Bad news? Darren asked from a few feet away, reading Elliot's posture more than his expression. I don't know yet, Elliot murmured. But I think something's coming. Darren didn't respond immediately. He reached out, gently placing a hand on the back of Elliot's chair, a touch that was steady but careful. Whatever it is, you don't have to go through it alone. The simplicity of the statement almost unraveled Elliot. Darren didn't know the whole story, but he knew enough to see that Elliot was drowning silently. Thank you, Elliot whispered, truly meaning it. The rest of the day passed in a blur. By the time he reached the apartment that evening, the air felt thick with anticipation. Caleb was already home, sitting at the edge of the couch with his elbows on his knees. His posture wasn't defensive, but it wasn't relaxed either. It was the posture of someone bracing for impact. Elliot hung his coat with trembling restraint. I'm here, he said softly. Caleb looked up, and the expression on his face was something Elliot had never seen before, not anger, not fear, not remorse. It was resignation. We've been avoiding this talk, Caleb began. Both of us. Elliot nodded, his throat tightening. I know. There was a long pause before Caleb spoke again. I haven't been fair to you. I know I've been distant. I know I've made you feel alone. The admission should have brought relief, but it didn't. It only deepened the ache in Elliot's chest. Why, Caleb? What changed? Caleb exhaled slowly. I've been trying to figure myself out. I've been confused, overwhelmed. I didn't want to hurt you, but I didn't know how to talk about it. Elliot waited, sensing there was more, much more, beneath the surface. Finally, Caleb continued, his voice barely above a whisper. I've been seeing someone emotionally. Not physically. But I crossed a line. He lowered his eyes. I didn't mean for it to happen. It was just, someone who listened when I wasn't listening to myself. The word struck Elliot like a quiet blow. Not explosive, not dramatic, but devastating in their calm honesty. So you couldn't talk to me, Elliot said, his voice steady in its fragility. But you talked to someone else. Caleb's silence was an answer. Elliot felt something inside him shift, not shatter, not break, but settle into a new, painful clarity. He had sensed this outcome long before Caleb admitted it. The late nights, the distant smile, the tension that filled every room they shared, it had all pointed to this moment that he didn't cry. He didn't shout. He simply breathed, deeply and deliberately, allowing the truth to land without resisting it. What happens now? Elliot asked quietly. Caleb looked up at him with a mixture of relief and sorrow. I don't know. But I think we need space. Real space. Elliot nodded. It was the first thing that made sense all week. Maybe we do. The conversation ended not with closure, but with an understanding that their relationship had reached a breaking point that couldn't be undone. Later, after Caleb retreated to the bedroom, Elliot sat alone at the kitchen table, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant murmur of city traffic. His heart felt bruised, but not destroyed. Hurt, but not unstable. His phone buzzed unexpectedly. A message from Darren. If tonight is difficult, just breathe. You're stronger than you feel. Elliot stared at the screen, overwhelmed by the timing, by the gentleness, by the way Darren seemed to sense the exact moment he needed support. For the first time in weeks, Elliot didn't feel like he was collapsing. He felt, held. He exhaled slowly, setting the phone aside. The pain was real, the future uncertain, but something new was forming quietly, unexpected, steady, and warm. Whatever came next, Elliot knew he had reached a point he couldn't turn back from, and somewhere in that truth, a new beginning waited. Elliot Marston spent most of the day pretending the conversation with Caleb Rossner hadn't happened. He moved through tasks with mechanical precision, answering emails, reviewing designs, and attending meetings while his mind replayed Caleb's confession like a loop he couldn't stop. Emotionally involved, not physically. The words had carved themselves into him, sharp, quiet, irrevocable. By late afternoon, the weight of everything began to seep into his posture. He sat at his desk, shoulders tense, jaw clenched, staring at a color palette he couldn't make sense of. It felt like his thoughts had been packed in fog. His phone buzzed twice, messages from colleagues, but he ignored them. He didn't have the emotional bandwidth to appear functional anymore. Darren Hale approached with that same gentle attentiveness he always carried. He didn't speak right away, he simply set a small container of sliced fruit on Elliot's desk, sliding it into his line of sight. Elliot blinked, startled by the gesture. "You look like you forgot that humans need nutrition," Darren said softly. Elliot let out a breath that was half laugh, half exhaustion. "I might have." Darren pulled a chair beside him, sitting without assuming closeness. "Rough night?" There was no judgment in his tone, no probing curiosity, just space. And somehow that made Elliot want to say everything he'd held back, but he didn't. Not fully. Not yet. That he only nodded. "Caleb and I talked. It wasn't good." Darren's expression softened, his eyes lifting with a mix of empathy and caution. "And you? Are you holding up?" Elliot hesitated, unsure how to explain the state he was in. "I'm functioning," he said finally, though even the word felt fragile. "That's not the same as being okay," Darren replied. Something about the way he said it, with quiet certainty, made Elliot avert his eyes. Darren wasn't offering solutions, he was offering understanding, and that was harder to accept. Hours later, when the office emptied and the winter light faded into early darkness, Elliot forced himself to stay busy. He reorganized files, archived folders, rewrote notes. Busy work meant to distract him from the ache he didn't yet know how to process, but eventually, the silence of the office pressed too tightly against him. Darren appeared again, coat in hand, pausing at Elliot's desk. "You should go home," he said gently. Elliot shook his head. "Home doesn't feel like home right now." Darren studied him for a moment, his brows knitting slightly. "Then come walk with me. Just around the block. You need air." Elliot considered refusing, but something deep inside him, something tired and aching, leaned toward yes. He grabbed his jacket and followed Darren down the stairwell, out into the crisp evening. The city was soft with the glow of streetlights, each one casting long amber shadows along the pavement. Traffic murmured in the distance. The sidewalks were damp from a light drizzle, reflecting the lights like fractured glass. They walked side by side without speaking for several minutes. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was grounding. Finally, Elliot broke the silence. "Caleb admitted things last night." His voice trembled. "He didn't cheat physically, but he crossed lines." Darren slowed his pace, not stopping completely, but giving the moment weight. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "No one deserves that kind of hurt." Elliot swallowed hard. "I keep thinking maybe I pushed him away. Maybe I didn't give him what he needed." Darren's tone sharpened, still calm, but firm. "Don't do that. Someone else's choices aren't your responsibility. You showed up, Elliot. You tried. You fought for something he stopped protecting." Elliot closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the truth in those words. They reached a small pedestrian bridge overlooking a nearly still river. The water below reflected the city lights in wavering streaks. Darren leaned against the railing, his posture relaxed, while Elliot stood rigid beside him, gripping the metal as though anchoring himself. "It feels like my life is splitting down the middle," Elliot murmured. "I thought we were stronger than this." "People change quietly," Darren said. "And sometimes those changes have nothing to do with us." Elliot looked at him, the question rising before he could stop it. "Have you ever gone through something like this?" Darren hesitated, just briefly, before answering. "Not like this. But I've been in situations where I gave everything I had, only to realize the other person wasn't in the same place anymore." Elliot swallowed. "How did you get through it?" "By realizing that heartbreak isn't proof of failure," Darren said. "Sometimes it's proof you cared. And caring deeply isn't a weakness." The words hit Elliot with an unexpected force. They felt like a salve, like something he'd needed but never dared ask for. As they stood there, the cold wind brushing against them, Elliot felt a shift, a small but undeniable one. Darren wasn't replacing anything. He wasn't stepping into a role or filling a void. He was simply there, steady and present, in a way that made Elliot feel less isolated. After a long moment, Darren spoke again. "Whatever happens next, you'll face it. You're stronger than this moment. I see it, even if you don't." Elliot felt his chest tighten with something that wasn't pain but wasn't comfort either. It was awareness. A growing awareness of someone who saw him in ways he'd forgotten he deserved. When they returned to the building, Elliot paused near the entrance, hands deep in his pockets. "Thank you for walking with me," he said. Darren nodded. "Anytime." Something lingered between them, not romantic, not impulsive, but undeniably intimate in a quiet, human way. A line neither of them crossed, yet neither of them stepped back from. That night, when Elliot finally returned to the apartment, Caleb was not there. A brief message waited on his phone, "Staying at a friend's place. I need space too." Elliot stared at the text, the room suddenly feeling cavernously empty. That he didn't cry. He didn't spiral. Instead, he sank onto the couch, pulling his knees close, letting the truth settle around him. Caleb was gone emotionally, and now physically too. It hurt, but beneath the hurt was something else. The faintest flicker of resilience that he wasn't alone in the dark anymore. Someone had seen him. Someone had stood beside him. Someone had steadied the ground beneath his feet. The story of what came next had already begun forming in the quiet space between endings and beginnings, and Elliot finally allowed himself to breathe.